So looking forward, where do you see, with your knowledge of all these use cases, where do you see the next breakthrough? Because very often, we often also compare it to the popcorn model where, it pops a bit, but then at some point things really take off. Do you see any of those turning points or things that will...
Again, with my previous disclaimer in mind that I can only predict something that will pay compared to what happens, I think that what is happening in the CBDC space, central bank digital currency, might have a huge impact, can really put all this technology on a different trajectory. So as you may know, there are a lot of central banks that worked a lot on this technology to try to understand the potential, to issue their own versions of digital currencies. And I was pleasantly surprised to see the speed, the quality, and the amount of work that the central banks put, and the BIS.
Are they using Corda in some of those projects?
Yes. We actually have a big presence in the community. So we started 2 years ago with a roadshow and some industry-wide initiatives. So we created a CBDC sandbox the central banks could use to try to experiment and understand the basic fundamental concepts. Of course, it was very simple. It was the whole purpose, to make it simple to focus on the different components of the solution. And then some of those banks went on to create pilot projects. And I will not name any of them, but there are some that have been really active with us. There are some that are very close to having production systems.
When you say close, when do you think they'll go?
I would say definitely within the next couple of years.
They'll go live within the next 2 years.
Yes, with some pilot project. It won't be like we're going to replace our currency with a digital version of it. So that is probably when that happens, that will change a lot of things.
What kind of parameters are they setting for that kind of CBDC? So if you, typically, since you can't really talk about specifics, but is gold backing, for example, something that is included in those CBDCs?
So there are so many different ways to approach this problem that you can say anything, and my answer would be yes. Some of them are doing it their way.
They're
so in
looking
some
for
cases
those
they
options.
want to back it up with the existing currencies or other assets, and then some of them are more focusing on transmission of monetary policy, so that they can actually use programmable money, like in the sample that I made with the digital currency for local governments in Japan. Because after the pandemic, I want to give money to people, but I want to make sure that they don't spend their money on, first of all, I want to make sure that they spend it, they don't hoard it. I want to make sure that they don't buy drugs, but they buy bread, milk, or whatever. And others maybe are more thinking about, people are not using cash that much anymore. So if cash disappears, it can't be just digital payments, because like I said before, it's two different things. They don't have the same attributes. So how do I still have a tool as a central bank to print money in a digital world?
So to paraphrase what you just said, it's really interesting. So one part, I guess the key question is, do you limit the amount of money that can be created with the CBDC, or do you do another fiat currency limitless type approach? And it sounds like they're actually really actively thinking about ways, algorithms, to create rules for monetary policy to at least influence it. And in some cases, maybe use gold backing as a limiting factor. And then there seems to be some cases that are more like a currency basket approach, right? Kind of like what we had with the euro when it started, when it was still the ECU, the European.
Yes, I remember that.
what was that called? The European Currency Unit, I think, was ECU.
So, like I said, the answer is yes. all the things you just said, because again, there are so many different models. So there are some common patterns that are emerging. So, for example, the first step is, of course, to be clear about the scope of the project. So, is it about wholesale digital currencies, or is it about retail? So, by that I mean it's just only talking about the fractional service that the central bank keeps from the commercial banks. So we can decide to have a digital version of that only, or you want to go all the way and provide people with digital currencies.
Right.
And again, for example, I know, because you can read it on newspapers, that the Riksbank, which is the oldest central bank in the world, was the first mover in this space, because back 4 or 5 years ago, they saw
which bank is that?
Riksbank in Sweden.
Okay. Yeah.
So they saw declining usage of cash in Sweden.
Yeah.
And for example, that wasn't the case in Italy. And but then
Also here in Switzerland, the commitment to paper cash was reconfirmed very strongly. Whereas Sweden, I can tell you, Serena and I, we actually went there last year in summer in June, and we wanted to go to this amusement park in Stockholm, but you had to already have ordered your visit online and paid for it with digital, so over with credit card or whatever. Cash, they wouldn't take any cash there. And there were several instances there where we wanted to pay in cash and you couldn't.
Yeah.
They would only take credit cards or the apps that they have on your phone. In Switzerland, we have something called Twint. I'm not sure what they have there, but
yeah. But with those, exactly, even in London, I remember, even before
I'm concerned
the pandemic,
about that development. Yeah. I think it's a huge control grab by government if it goes down that road.
So yes, the Riksbank was concerned about that. So they started investigating the space because they had that retail problem in mind. But there are other central banks that are coming from the opposite perspective and they say, well, actually, we don't have that problem, but we want to understand the implication of this technology. So we're thinking about maybe it can allow us to do a wholesale central bank digital currency in a more efficient way. The other thing that is a bit theoretical, but I think it's worth covering, is that the way currency is defined, which I think makes sense, is that has three main attributes. One is, so it is something that is a store of value. Maybe you've heard the story. It is a store of value. It is a unit of account. It is also a mean of transfer. So
exchange.
A mean of exchange. And so we are used to that understanding of what a currency is. Now we're also used to the fact that it's fiat currency. You can create it out of thin air.
Right.
But so we believe that that is the way it's always been, and it will also always be. But that's never the case. What we believe is always been like this is actually a snapshot in time.
Totally.
And it's probably a tiny slice of time. So fiat currency has been around only for 50 years, okay? Before it was based on gold. And so going forward, it may all of a sudden change and be something different. So there was at least one interesting research paper on the possibility for this different aspect to be rebundled together in different ways. Yeah. So in the future, instead of having a currency that has all three attributes, you can have currencies that are only used for specific applications and they only have one of these three attributes. And for example, and then they will be rebundled not along state boundaries, country boundaries, but along other boundaries. Maybe Facebook, maybe another social network, or maybe, and so you can imagine a world, and maybe it's already happening to a certain extent, because you can't really, I mean, if you make an effort like I did, you could buy something using Bitcoin, so you can say, yes, it is a medium of exchange. Store of value, risky? Maybe, maybe not. Unit of account? Definitely not. Because even when I was buying my soup in Bitcoin, that soup had a price that was in pound, okay? Then there was an exchange rate. So, but in the future, or actually even now, there are people that are buying Bitcoins because they hope that they will go up in value. And to a certain extent, it has big swings, but it doesn't disappear.
So if you created currencies that actually maybe cover one or two, not all three, of those cash or currency aspects, that, for example, could provide governments or central banks with new tools to manage inflation, for example. Are those discussions also part of the? Are you allowed to say that? Are those discussions part of the discussions around the topic of CBDC? Because I've never heard of that. That's really interesting.
Actually, this paper was. I mean, I may be wrong, but maybe I will provide the link that you can publish together with the video.
That's really interesting.
It might have been. I've read a lot of stuff by the BIS, the Bank of International Settlements.
Right.
This might have been one of their papers. They are really, like I said, they're doing a phenomenal job. They're really looking into this very closely. They're thinking about all the potential ramifications because they have realized that having something that is like, again, going back to the beginning, electronic cash can be so disruptive and can create so many good things, but it can also pose so many powerful threats to the...
I mean, the big picture implication that comes to mind right now, I mean, if we look at where we are right now, we're in a phase where, at least since World War II, the US dollar has been the trade and reserve currency of the world. The US has benefited hugely from that. And now suddenly there's a lot of talk about different kinds of currencies, including the BRICS gold-backed currency, which also could be facilitated even more via a digital type of application. What you just said, I mean, you could envision a completely new and different system moving forward. Is that something you guys see in the discussions? Because right now we're in a phase where America is a bit with its back to the wall, and politically, this rift between the red bloc and the blue bloc, let's say, and Europe kind of being undecided without a strategy in the middle, is becoming more intense, and part of that intensity is around the currency. There's other things, obviously resources are always at play, from oil now also to semiconductors and so on, but the question of who owns the best currency is a huge question which will change our world. And,
absolutely, and of course you will not get adoption just by releasing a technology, so it has to do with like the amount of power that you can project into the world. But it's probably what you just said is a very interesting comment, that one way of looking at it is that probably explains what is happening right now with CBDCs, where I give you this bit of information. The US...
You've made me so curious.
Okay.
I have a lot of questions, but I know you can't talk about them.
So the US has probably been the central bank that has done the least in that space, while China is probably one of the most advanced, and they are talking about the digital one every day. That tells you something. The US, I mean, what they have created is serving them so well that any changes...
Everyone else wants a piece of that.
Yes, any changes for the US can probably go the wrong way. But for a challenger of the existing, like, let's call it status quo, and again, I'm not passing any judgment, I'm just trying to make people...
No, I think it's a reality that everyone at this point is realizing that there's there's a new kid on the block, and it's a powerful one, and there's a new block being created around the Chinese advance, and China has lots of problems of its own, so it's not clear where this game will go yet, but there is definitely that competition, and currency is a huge piece of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's I think we are living exciting times.